Hey everyone, I'm Lucy, and joining me today to discuss the recently revealed Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, we've got folks from Marvel Games and Eidos Montreal. So let's go around the panel. We've got Senior Narrative Director Mary Dinmal.
Hello.
We have Senior Creative Director Jean-Francois Dugas.
Hi.
And we also have VP of Creative of Marvel Games, Bill Roseman.
Pew pew! Hello, true believers.
Now we've got quite the panel to discuss this game. So Bill, I'm going to come to you first. Why Eidos for Guardians of the Galaxy?
Marvel is built upon really bringing together the right creators with the characters they love, and letting the creators bring their voice and their vision and telling their story with the Marvel characters. And that's the case here. Eidos Montreal has the passion, the knowledge, the rock and roll DNA, the humor to create this story. They're the perfect collaborators to bring them to life, and we can't wait for the players to get their hands on the game. It's just freaking delightful what the team has created, and that's all we can hope for at Marvel is people who love the characters as much as we do to bring themselves to them and create something awesome.
And I mean, speaking of the characters, you obviously have this sort of embarrassment of riches to choose from when it comes to Marvel characters, both, you know, the famous faces that we've seen for the last however many decades, but also you kind of have those more niche villains and heroes to pull from. So Mary, where do you start when you tackle a project like Guardians of the Galaxy? Like, you obviously have the comics, you've got the movies, but you're wanting to put your own spin on things. Where do you start?
Well, for us, we really start by diving into the resource material. So obviously we've seen the movies and loved them, and we then did a deep dive into the comic books. And it was really fun to discover the differences between these characters in the different forms they took. There's always a common essence of who these characters are, but they were always a little bit different. And realizing that, you kind of realize, okay, now we get to put our stamp on this by discovering what we want to bring, as long as we're true to the essence of, you know, Star-Lord the space pirate, Gamora the deadliest woman in the galaxy. And you kind of just dive into the source material, and then you let your imaginations go wild, and you work with Bill and his team to make sure that everything you are putting forward is still staying within the essence of the characters.
And I was going to say, and I mean, watching the presentation, it's immediately apparent, just like the characters, you've nailed them, but it's also really, really funny. What are the challenges of making a game where you can hear those lines over and over again? Is the game still funny to you? Are you still charmed by these moments between all these characters?
Well, I'll let Bill and JF add to it if they want to, but writing humor is one of the most challenging things there is to do, because you're right. If you're working on a project for a long time, you start hearing the same lines over and over, and you start wondering, are they funny or not? I think I worked with a group of amazing writers who just bounced off each other all the time, and going through the various stages of seeing it on the paper, then doing TTS, and then going into the actual voice actors, it never ever got old. And there are still jokes that today just make me laugh out loud.
When we started that project, she was very nervous because she was like, I don't know how to write humor and whatnot. But with the team she pulled together, they really managed to pull this off. And to be honest with you, to this day, there are some scenes that we're still laughing out loud and everything. And we go like, okay, if we still enjoy it, we feel like that there's something there that will be really fresh for players, and will be really, like Bill said, delightful.
And you know, it's like your favorite comedy. You can watch a movie over and over, and if it makes you laugh, it'll still make you laugh. So
That's it.
yeah, they in addition to the rock and roll, that's the one thing that the team really got was the game is fun and it's funny. And that's what you expect from Guardians. You expect that Marvel blend of drama and intensity, and then someone cracks a joke. And that's part of the Marvel magic, and they nailed it.
I mean, speaking of intensity, Jean-Francois, I'm really interested to know what the leap was like. Everyone obviously knows of Eidos Montreal as kind of being the Deus Ex studio, and you and Mary have both worked on Deus Ex. What was the leap like for you to create something that's so high? I mean, Deus Ex has its moments of high octane gameplay, but you think of Adam Jensen as like skulking in the shadows, whereas with Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, it's the completely other end of the spectrum. You are firing your blasters, you're jumping all over the place, but you're also kind of micromanaging the rest of the Guardians in a way. So what was the leap like to implementing that?
Working on the previous games, like you mentioned, you go and read like philosophy, and when you start to work on Guardians of the Galaxy, you go bungee jumping. And that's the kind of leap in your head that you have to go for. It was for us, it was truly exciting, because anything like when we were working on Deus Ex or past titles in our careers, like one of the first thing that goes through my mind when I'm presented a potential project is, can I fall in love with this? Yes or no? And if I can fall in love with it, and if I feel like the material, there's so much richness to be explored, then I will get excited. And I would say on top of that is, so it's kind of the first step. And early on, when we knew that this was to happen, we flew to LA and meet Bill and his team and everything. And we had a great discussion that lasted for probably a couple of hours, because like any collaboration, until you're together, you never know what their intentions are, what is your sandbox, and things like that. And very early on, we discovered that Bill and his team at Marvel Games, like they were fully excited. They said, we brought you on board for what you're able to do, not for what we are. We want you to bring your own flavor into our own identity. And that was exciting, because we saw that we had quite some freedom, and to test that, because like we have this initial meeting, right, and we exchanged those wishes, and we started to work and brainstorm in Montreal. And the first iterations of the characters that we did, like we said, we'll put it to 11 and we'll push those characters. And Bill and his team, they flew to Montreal, and we sat them on our couch, and maybe it was a few seconds, but for me it lasted minutes in my head. Like Bill was like this, and me in my head I was like, oh my God, we're dying, they're going to kill us and everything. But no, actually what we did was too much, but they fully appreciated that we were trying to bring something to the table. And after that, we just worked together to refine to the looks that you're seeing today. So it's quite exciting for us, because sometimes people speak, but do they mean what they say? And on both ends, I think we matched that, and we were very happy with that, and it was quite a journey.
And you're right, Jeff. If I can just jump on and say, throughout Marvel's history, that's the secret. You know, when you look at the history of Marvel Comics, for example, there are famous runs that readers love, and you say, oh, you say Frank Miller's Daredevil, Walt Simonson's Thor, John Byrne's run on Fantastic Four. It's yes, they're Marvel characters, but when the creators come and they have a vision and they bring themselves to the character and they present the character in a new, fresh way that's revolutionary and interesting, we love that. So that's our philosophy, and we want them to bring themselves and do their versions. It's their vision and their versions of the Guardians. But still, what JF said about bungee jumping, JF and Mary, they bungee jumped. See those books right behind Mary, those Marvel books? They bungee jumped into those books. They did. And they came back and presented their vision and their story. And you'll see in the game, it is just packed with, I won't even call them Easter eggs. They're building blocks. They're Marvel DNA. Characters, locations, moments, images, sounds, it all comes organically and authentically from the source material. And it's a love letter. It's a love letter to the characters that is authentic and true to the history, but still fresh and new in creating a modern experience.
No higher praise than that. I was going to ask, obviously, you're playing through the game as Star-Lord, but you have the group to think of. You have those dynamics. I noticed, there's a point in the gameplay where Drax throws Rocket over some sort of gorge, and there's this, kind of devastating. Rocket is mad at you because you did this. What's it like sort of balancing those group dynamics, you know, making sure that everyone gets their fair say, everyone gets the right amount of screen time, but without it becoming overbearing because, you know, too many cooks, too many guardians yelling at you to do the right thing, I suppose. So how do you keep that balanced?
Well, I think the way we do it is you start with, you know, I start obviously with the story, and we know that we're writing an ensemble storyline because yes, Star-Lord is a central character and everything that happens in the game is through his eyes. He's at the center of every decision that has to be made, and he's really experiencing the other characters, these unique, wild, you know, misfits who have very strong personalities of their own. And so finding the balance between making sure that all of those characters have their screen time, have their moments together, you kind of just look at it through the eyes of Star-Lord, and you start, it all starts kind of falling into place. At least that's how it felt for me, ensuring that every character has their own moments, their own arcs, and yet because you're Star-Lord at the center, you're controlling it, and you get to make the choices in those moments to talk to various characters or to chime in on their conversations. And they go in different ways as a result. And all of it just comes into this great infused center focus on you are Star-Lord and you are hanging out with these amazing characters and having really, really deep, meaningful, yet funny conversations with them, along with all the gameplay and the battles and the stuff that you're leading them through.
Just to say, to complete with what Mary just said from a story perspective, but also from an experience perspective, like being Star-Lord, like this fantasy of being one of the Guardians and being surrounded by Gamora, Drax, Groot, and Rocket almost at any given time. Like, it was also in gameplay the same thing, like creating scenarios in which like the different characters would have key roles to play, or the way you play and the decisions you make can affect them and how they're going to react to certain events, and will force you to readapt afterwards. And that was also a central piece of the experience that we were figuring out for the last few years.
Awesome. And I was going to ask, because I mean, first of all, the game is coming out way sooner than I assumed. Like, I mean, I suppose maybe I'm just used to the, you know, we'll show it at E3 and you'll get it next year. So it's coming out October 26th. Yeah. Single player, coming out for kind of current gen and last gen too. So I think,
yes,
you know, you've obviously been working on this game for such a long amount of time. I've got to ask, is it kind of a self-contained story? Is it the beginning of, you know, hopefully way more Guardians stories to come? I can see an eyebrow twitching there, Bill. But what's the future? Are you hoping that this is going to be the next big, huge franchise from Eidos?
I'll say this, in true Marvel fashion, Eidos Montreal has presented an experience that if you're a huge Marvel fan or a huge Guardians fan, you're going to really love the deep dive. If you're new to the Guardians, it's just going to be really fun and an awesome experience because they're so good at what they do. You don't need to know anything going into it. Everything is laid out. Everything is introduced. You understand all the relationships and who everyone is. It is I would say it is a complete story, self-contained adventure. But, you know, however, in true Marvel style, it also sets up some awesome story threads. So who can say what the future will hold? But you're going to get a full, complete experience when you play this game.
And like I said, it's out in October. So one final quick question before we go. There's a lot of licensed music in this, and obviously music is a huge part of the Guardians. Is that going to come out as a soundtrack? Because already you've got Holding Out for Hero, you've got Bad Reputation, you've got me on board already. I mean, how many more bangers are on that soundtrack, I have to ask? And what was the process like in choosing them, just very quickly?
Yeah. I think one of the main things, like Bill was saying earlier on, the Guardians are kind of rock and roll misfits, and Peter is a kid from Earth, and he grew up in the 80s, and a lot of the pop culture back in that time, like, it's what influenced him. And when he was kidnapped and was taken in the cosmic universe and everything, his point of reference is still back in the 80s and everything. So we started with our audio director and with Marvel and talk about like the songs that we would love to have. We build a list and we try to be eclectic to really capture the vibe, like not just go into pop or just in rock and roll. Like we mix a lot of these things together to try to have a broad scope of like Peter, all the things he loved back then, and he brought him with him in the Guardians of the Galaxy world that we created. And so it was a very fun process, or just going back to the memory lane. You know, sometimes you're at home at night and you just go through the old video clips of MTV and things like that, and you go, oh yeah, that was good. And after that, it was also a question that the lyrics needed to speak to the events of the game. Like, it's not just the song for the effect of the song, it needs also to speak to the emotional curves that we're exploring. And today I'm not going to go that much in detail, but you have seen a teaser in the presentation today where the music will play a role in gameplay, and we call it the huddle. And when you're on the battlefield and you're fighting enemies, at some point, like, you have a token that builds up that at some point you can use. And that is based on some of the songs that Peter knows to try to pump his team. So we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail down the road. But we wanted to infuse the music also into the gameplay experience. And like Bill teases, is that there's more to the music that we're not talking today that will come soon.
Wonderful. Well, Bill, Jean-Francois, and Mary, thank you so much for joining me today. And like I said, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is out October 26th. And for more from this year's E3 and of course Play for All, make sure you stay tuned to GameSpot.